Okay, tada. Hi, everyone. My name is Tina, and I'm here with my co-host, Nosipo. And we have a special guest today in the Municipal Bill podcast. And our guest is Charity. Charity is coming from the city of Joburg. Yeah. We are bringing in municipalities as we promised that we want to engage with local government institutions. So today our episode will specifically look at municipal finances. As you know, we have started to engage in that conversation in the previous episode. But what we want to do right now is to drill specifically in understanding exactly what are the critical issues that affect municipalities in terms of their performances. Now, we all know that cities are getting very poor audit outcomes. I mean, my city of Ekurhuleni, got very poor audit outcomes in the 2023 financial year. And of course, City of Johannesburg also has a couple of issues that they need to address. But we want to link those issues with the municipal finances because those are very critical. And I can tell you one thing, that, at local government, when it comes to financial viability, that is a big question that we need to address. So, Charity, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for making time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I understand that I'm speaking to somebody who has been in the local government sector for a very long time in the finance division. Can you please just tell us more about your work that you do in the city of Joburg?
Thank you very much, Tina. So I am currently in a unit called Group Accounting. So we put together the city's budget. Currently, the city's budget is over 80 billion. I'm also responsible for reporting during the course of the year how we're performing against that budget. So if we said we were going to raise so much revenue, have we raised that revenue? If we said we were going to spend so much money on certain service delivery aspects, have we spent that money? I'm also responsible for then putting together the financial statements at the end of the year, which then tell the residents and anyone interested how we've performed against the budget and just how financially viable we are in terms of our financial statements. So I've been in this role since about 2012. Before that, I did various things within group finance. I've developed financial strategies. I've worked on preparing the business plans, so I'm an all-rounder in group finance.
Wow, exceptionally well, I must say.
God, so are you a person that signs off on my municipal bill?
Not exactly, but I am part of the team of people that decide whether the proposed tariffs make sense and how they fit into the whole picture of putting the budget together and ultimately what you then end up being charged.
How do you come up to that decision? Because it's always interesting. What I know about the tariffs is that every year they increase, they never reach.
Because how do you even determine the percentage as well of increase? Yeah.
So we pass through the costs, basically. So a lot of what you are paying is a pass-through cost from us because we've also paid that to ESKOM or to Rand Water. So when we begin our budgeting cycle, typically we will engage people like ESKOM and Rand Water and get a sense of what are they expecting to increase their tariffs by in the next year. We then also look at other factors internally. How much do we think people will consume of those services? And therefore, how much will we overall collect when we add the number of units plus what is being paid for it? And therefore, what makes a reasonable tariff, taking into account that that money must also help us to keep investing in the infrastructure, to maintain it, to put out new infrastructure, replace older infrastructure. So all of those costs are taken into account in determining what we're then going to propose as the tariff for the next year.
So, okay, let me get this. So ESKOM says you want to increase by X percent, 10%. And then when you say pass through, what does it mean? It goes to the customer.
Yes.
And then you add your little bit. Sprinklers.
Just a little bit for us to be able to maintain infrastructure as well.
And then that makes it into my bill.
Yes.
Is there a way for you as a municipality to negotiate with ESKOM or is it a collective negotiation to say, this is too steep even for us and our customers?
So what I do know is that when ESKOM is applying for their tariff, they engage with NERSA. NERSA then also invites people like ourselves, the municipalities, and I think the general public, to make representations whether they think it's a fair increase or not. So we have gone to those forums and put our case forward where we think it's unreasonable, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who are face-to-face with the clients. But we have to pass through that cost if that is what NERSA then agrees is the tariff they're giving to ESKOM.
I have, Tina, attended the NERSA meeting, but my question here is, for water, is it the same process? Is there a similar body that regulates for water so that we can also express?
Not that I'm aware of. I think it comes directly via RAND Grant.
Okay.
And there are cases where we've also engaged RAND Water, I think 2 years ago, where we felt that the tariff they were proposing was a bit steep. And as a municipality, we can engage them as well.
Yeah. And then in terms of electricity, I know this is a big problem with municipalities, because obviously you need to make a connection via your trading services, electricity, water, sanitation, waste collection, etc. But when I look at the reports, when it comes to the collection rate, because Treasury always gives a threshold of 95%. And for example, in my city, Nakuruleni, what we have seen over the years, particularly from 2016, is that they've struggled to reach that 95%. Actually, they were operating around 75%. And specifically comes from electricity. So what is the state of City of Johannesburg? Because I understand that you also have quite a huge debt. Some of that debt is coming from Soweto and other parts. I mean, what is the state in City of Johannesburg when it comes to electricity collection?
So I think we're also struggling insofar as I think the struggle is actually more on people connecting illegally. If you look at our collection rate, our electricity collection rate is the highest of all the services. The one that we are struggling with, where it was in the region of the 70s, was actually for water collectors. Because typically when you're wanting to collect for electricity, you can go and switch off. And that should then encourage the customer to come in and talk to us, make an arrangement, and then they can pay off maybe over 12 months or whatever is affordable for them. So electricity, the collections are generally higher. But what we are struggling with is people tapping into the network illegally or bypassing the meters or tampering with the meters, such that what we are buying from ESKOM is not translating into what we are able to realize as revenue that we can generate.
So it's like financial leakages in the system.
Yes. And what that does is that it takes away from the money that then becomes available for us to plow back into those same communities to make sure that when their substations burst or and whatever, we're able, to readily have money to respond to those outages. What we are struggling with on the water side as well is, if you look at our debtors book, I think our debtors book is upwards of 54 billion.
That's a lot.
It's a big amount. And the bulk of that is actually residential customers that are not paying for water. So I think more than half of that 50-odd billion is water debtors, and primarily residential. Typically would like to connect, where we disconnect water, it'll then assist us to get collections on the water side. So where we disconnect electricity. But now the challenge is pockets of Johannesburg are not actually supplied by city power for electricity. So if we need to do credit control in areas like Soweto, we're not able to use switching off the electricity in order to get the water, because they're an ESKOM supply area.
So it becomes very difficult.
And so it's a problem, because this is government. It's all government. Can't you just go and speak to those ESKOM supplied areas and sort it out?
There is discussion to say it would be easier if everyone who lives within Johannesburg was managed by the municipality.
Sure.
So there has been discussions between the city and ESKOM to actually transfer all of those ESKOM debtors to the city of Joburg, which would include Sandton, Soweto, Orange Farm, Midrand, I think some parts of Midrand as well, which would then make it easier for us to also do those credit control measures.
I don't see though that happening very soon, and I'll tell you discussion for another day, because there's a bill that's out, the amendment of the electricity regulation bill, and my understanding of it, and I know very little about these things, is that it's taking away so much from municipalities in terms of electricity distribution in favor of ESKOM. And yeah, I'd love for us to chat about this and maybe talk about in future what's the position of the city and other municipalities.
Absolutely. And then Charity, one other aspect that I would like us to touch on is the issue related to water. Today, when I was driving to work on SAFM, a lot of people were calling, complaining. We haven't had water for so long. We're not getting any support from the municipality in terms of bringing us, water supply, water tankers. That has really brought up this kind of inertia of saying that why should we continue to pay our bills when the municipality is struggling to give us water, to provide us with water? And it's one of the things that we really discuss in this podcast. That's why we call it Municipal Bill, because that municipal bill is what connects us to the municipality. And if I do not get services, the question is, why do I have to continue paying for these services? So the water issue is really becoming a crisis. In fact, this civil society organizations are starting to bring up these groups, these campaign groups, to make sure that they put pressure on the municipality to resolve issues. So I want to specifically touch on what are the major critical issues when it comes to water, and why communities not receiving water. We're having old infrastructure. You need repairs. What is the status?
So, the history that South Africa comes from, there were a lot of disparities in the provision of services. So I think for the first probably 10 to 15 years, once the United City of Joburg was in place, the emphasis was on being developmental and providing services to those communities that didn't have those services. So it was about expanding the network, so that communities that had bucket system type of, for their toilets, they were able to get flushing toilets and so on. Now, what that meant was there were some older neighborhoods that perhaps we felt, okay, they've got access, we'll repair as we go along. But now where it's left us is that infrastructure has now reached the end of its life, and you're finding a lot of burst pipes, and there's statistics that my colleagues from Joburg Water share often in terms of the increase in the number of bursts that we have on an annual basis has just shot up year on year. So while I spoke about losses for electricity because people are tapping into the network illegally, for water, the losses that we have are because the infrastructure is failing us. Now, what that requires from us is that if we were to respond adequately to that, we would need to put almost 5 billion a year just for the water infrastructure to deal with the historical backlog.
Where does the city have the capacity to?
That's where I was going to say, where do we get that money from? Because you touched on the tariffs just now. We can't now pass on, Rand Water plus in order to get that money. So there's a mind shift that has to now happen in terms of how we allocate money to kind of now deal with these sets of infrastructure that are bursting. There was an anecdotal story I was sharing last week where on my street alone, in a space of 2 weeks, there were 3 houses who had leaks in their driveway, and it was the municipal pipeline. And when I engaged with the technical people on that, they were saying, it's because when you give us the money, you give us the money for this street. You need to give us the money for the entire neighborhood so that we retrofit the entire neighborhood and replace those pipes that are 50, 60 years old. So it has to be strategic how we then now respond to this. Will it lead to some discomfort? It will, because if we're going to deal with an entire neighborhood for a season, we'll have the discomfort of us digging up the ground and water switched off, so we can do that. Thankfully, National Treasury has also come on board with reforms that they're doing for our trading services, where additional grants will be made available going forward, but they're incentive-based. So once we get the grants, we need to also show that we can spend that money. And we are targeting specifically water and electricity infrastructure, the first one being the water infrastructure. And I think it's because it's becoming quite critical.
Yes. And DBSA, have you had any conversations as the city? Because I know DBSA does provide some sort of grant funding for infrastructure.
So I think we've had ongoing discussions with DBSA for a number of years.
By the way, DBSA is the Development Bank of South Africa.
So there have been discussions with DBSA over the years for specific projects that they've had interest in. I know they've had interest in the waterworks up towards Lanseria, and that's a critical area for us to invest in for expansion of the city towards the new Lanseria smart city. And I know DBSA has shown some interest in that. We've often tapped into funding from DBSA for our normal capital budget funding. So DBSA is one of our biggest funders as the city of Johannesburg. So they're always willing to come on board and work with us.
Okay. Spending of grants. Spending of grants.
Very much important. Can we just ask a question? Because I know that when we talk about the municipality, when you see a bill, you see water, you see electricity, you see refuse. But when we talk about tariffs, it goes beyond that. It's the money that I pay when I go to the zoo every year. It increases. It's the money that I pay if I want to use the community hall for my wedding, from the mouth to the heavens, community hall or recreational hall. How are those determined? Is it the same process? And maybe importantly, if you look around in many cities, I mean, I was in Buffalo City Municipality, some of the halls which I've been fortunate enough to be there when there was ribbon cutting, they were being built. You look at them now. They are in a state of disrepair. Are these tariff costs reflective? And when, maybe my follow-up question to that is that when you're collecting money for a particular function or service, say hall or community services, do you then ring fence it to make sure that you've collected this much, it's going to be enough for you to repair the hall and
because those assets, some of them, they don't really generate a lot of money. Because they also need to think about the city needs to think about the community orientation in terms of its utility. Affordability, don't create inequalities. So how do you do that?
So those tariffs are primarily, it's an annual increase linked to inflation. But when you look at how much you're paying to use those facilities like the swimming pools, the amount you pay is really not enough to cover the cost of running that swimming pool. However, when you pay for your rates, the rates that the city is able to generate assist us to be able to cover costs associated with some of those services that are not able to generate enough money on their own to support that service. And therefore, it's important when you see your bill, property rates line is actually helping us to fund a lot of other public sort of benefits and services that in and of themselves, they're not able to necessarily generate enough revenue to sustain that particular set.
Okay, so a functioning property market and the one that grows also assists the city in its revenue efforts.
It does. It really does. And then with cost subsidization, how does that work? How does it work? Because cost subsidization is part of the formation of what I call the post-apartheid state. So that your socially deprived areas, they are not left out. So how does it work?
So in Johannesburg, we've always said when we put our budget together that we intend for entities like City Power, Joburg Water, to some extent pick it up. We've also got a market in Johannesburg. Those entities that are able to function as businesses that generate a surplus, those surpluses we can then use to cross-subsidize and fund other aspects of the city's business that in and of themselves cannot necessarily generate that money. But also cross-subsidization in the sense that for those that are able to afford, that part of what should be our mindset when we're paying is that we're contributing to improve our entire society, that we cannot have pockets of people who live at a particular standard of service whereas others don't. So I think, that is the view that we've had to say, where those that pay, the money that they pay can then be used to assist us to expand the services or improve the quality of service that we provide in other areas where maybe people are not able to afford. And I think together with that is also the use of grants that we get from national government, like the equitable share, for us to be able to provide free services to those who are not able to pay for them.
I'm raising this point, and I like how you articulate it, because we are starting to see an emergence of ratepayers associations, particularly, in your upper middle class neighborhoods, who are obviously lamenting that they are not getting value out of what they are paying towards the city. So now they want to withhold. It's what we call tax boycotts at local government level. And it actually talks to the element of saying that if we are now going to have these small little neighborhoods who want to control their own resources, what is the impact of that? Because at the end of the day, the money that we contribute through our bills is supposed to take care of rescue the city, instead of creating these small little enclaves. But anyway, moving on a little bit, I want to go back to the spending of grants. Municipalities are showing very profitable performance in spending of grants. In fact, the National Treasury this year said they wanted to take away 600 million away from the cities in Gauteng because grants were not being spent. Can you tell us a little bit more about why is it that a city will expect to have the capacity to plan for procurement, to actually execute? You've got enough human resource capabilities. Why aren't you able to spend grants if that would be a place in any city?
Tell you why I love the question, Tina, because when it's sitting in the IDP, and I make this reference to my parents because I made sure that I introduced them to the IDP when I could understand what that is. And I said, if it's not in the IDP, it will not be done. And my parents are pensioners, and some of your documents, they are written very small. So with their classes, every year, they look at their ward, because you categorize it. They are in eThekwini, by the way. They're trying to find projects in their ward. And because their daughter said, if it's in the IDP, it will be done. It will be done. And year on year, some of those projects that are in the IDP, they're not doing. And now I don't have an answer to them to say, yeah, it's in the IDP, but it can't be done. Help me understand.
I also want to understand. I think sometimes there are challenges once the project now gets to a point of let's implement, where maybe communities feel that they were not consulted enough. So sometimes this thing we do as government is we think on behalf of communities and we decide we're going to put this into the budget, but perhaps we didn't engage the community enough, or when the project is being implemented and we're appointing community liaison officers, the community doesn't agree with who's been appointed. So sometimes there's those delicacies that happen within the community that maybe will slow a project down, and we're not able to spend the money as we intended to. Sometimes as well, we put projects in the budget that maybe have not quite gone through the full cycle of the feasibilities, the environmental assessments, and all of that. And those processes then delay us to actually get to the point of spending the money. What we found in the city of Joburg is that you'll go through the first 3 quarters up to the end of March, and spending is happening, but it's not, that high. Then it ramps up in the 4th quarter because we've spent the first 3 quarters kind of doing the planning processes and, getting ourselves together on the ground. And then you'll typically find this hockey stick effect and the spending happens in the 4th quarter.
Yeah.
So often when we get those notifications from the national departments to say we intend to cut X amount of money, it's because when they look at the first 2 quarters, we're not looking like we are spending according to where they would have expected us to be by the end of the 2nd quarter. And typically they'll then ask us, put your plan in place, tell us how you intend to recover and the cash flows until you spend the money. And often they then come back and say, okay, we see your plans, everything looks in order, and then they don't take the money away. But if our responses are unconvincing, then the money does get taken away. So from where I sit, from the budget space, we're always encouraging departments to spend early in the year. As you get the tranches of grants, spend as you get the money, because then it takes us out of that uncomfortable space of having to explain whether we'll be able to spend the money. But unfortunately, there are instances, sometimes we do get to the end of the year and that project that Bogogon and Kulu saw in the budget doesn't get implemented. But we do have an opportunity to say perhaps our supply chain processes took long. We can motivate National Treasury to roll over that money for us to use in the next financial year. And hopefully in the next year we can then give the money.
And that's why I always say, even if I was the most intelligent person, I would never be a councillor. Because imagine poor councillor now, Bogo and Cool is knocking on their door and they're saying, you said there would be, where is this project? So I'm picking up from what you're saying, that it's not just about spending the money, but it also the relationship between the operations of the municipality and the governance and accountability that gets affected. Okay, no, that's clear. And then I'm going to touch on if you allow me, Tina, on a very sensitive subject, which is accurate billing.
Absolutely.
And I know that when I get my bill from Vodacom, and I think I must also let me talk about my biases. Because when I get my bill from Vodacom or from MTN or something, I never really go line by line to check whether that phone call was it really 20 minutes and it wasn't an hour. But when I get my bill from the municipality, I do that. Right? Well, at least there was a time when I did that, up until a point where sometimes the bill would be so inaccurate, I would just pay because I didn't want to be cut off. You're like, okay, just leave it up to God. How is the municipality supposed to ensure that the bill that it gives to the customer is accurate? And when that doesn't happen, what's the problem?
Okay. And recourse as well. What recourse can I take? Because I would go and complain in my municipality, especially with the water bill shoots up. I definitely go and complain.
So when we bill you, say, for water or electricity, ideally it should be based on what you've consumed, which is measured by the meter that's on your property. A few years ago, I know we went through a process of putting all the water meters outside the premises, because before the meters were inside the premises, and that would now require us to come knocking on your door and hopefully you are home for us to access it. So now the meters are outside the yard, the same with the electricity meters as well, which allows our meter readers to then be able to come, take the reading. We take that reading, put it into the system, apply the applicable tariff, and then we get the amount that we're supposed to bill you. Now, where it fails sometimes, like I said, if we're not able to read your meter for whatever reason, sometimes there are communities that chase us away. Where when the meter readers are coming to read the meters, they literally gang up as a community and chase away the meter readers. Even if maybe we want to go in and check that the meter is functional and working, communities are up in arms, and it's a level of lawlessness that we are struggling to understand why people feel they don't need to have their meters read, or they don't want to contribute meaningfully towards financing the city. There are instances where we're not able to get to every resident every month, so we estimate your meter reading, and we estimate it based on your historical trend.
Cool.
So if you've generally consumed 20 kiloliters of water a month, we can apply that 20 kiloliters, and it'll show on your bill that this month is an estimate. If it's an actual reading, it'll show the last reading was this and the closing reading was this, therefore you consumed so much.
Before you go on the estimation, can you estimate for 6 months or 8 months? What's the limit when it comes to estimation?
Okay, now you've caught me out. One of them is 3 months and one of them is 6 months. I can't remember which one between water and electricity. But there is a bylaw that says we must read the meter at least every 3 months or at least every 6 months.
Okay.
And if we don't do that as the municipality, we'll have an adverse finding from the AG.
Okay.
So we must show that we've read every meter in person, or that we've estimated it at least 4 times if it's quarterly, or at least twice if it's the 6 month one.
Okay. Tina asked what's the recourse. So let's say it's wrong and I really feel that this bill that I have is so inaccurate. What is my recourse?
So you can come to one of our walk-in centers and have a discussion with the service agents. Bring all your evidence. Like I have one that I need to put my little email together. I must get all my photographs and all my meter readings. So I think it's about coming with all your facts to say, there's also no harm in you as a resident also tracking your own meter readings on a regular basis. I know in Joburg, and I think in S1E as well, they've got that same system where as residents you can take your own meter reading and send it to the municipality, which will also help to not have this issue of the inaccuracies and the estimates. But I think as residents, we have a right to go and engage with the municipality and raise a query. And if you don't get a satisfactory response through the walk-in center, in the city of Joburg, we have an ombudsman's office. You can escalate your issue to the ombudsman's office for them to also attend to it and ensure that the relevant department deals with your matter.
So these things they can be resolved.
Exactly.
So I just need to know which door to knock on.
Absolutely. So you spoke about adverse findings. There is what we call irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure that the Auditor General will highlight in some municipalities, non-compliance related matters. So in the case of City of Joburg, what has been the trend? I'm asking this because we will have the Auditor General joining us in the next episode. So it would be lovely for us to get a little bit of an insight on the City of Johannesburg.
So we've had a trend of increasing unauthorized, irregular and fruitless expenditure.
Well, that's big English. What is unauthorized and fruitless? And did you say Westler? What is that?
So unauthorized expenditure is if, let's say, we allocate 100 Rand to a particular function.
Sure.
And that function then spends 120 Rand. So that 20 Rand extra that they spend is called unauthorized expenditure because it wasn't authorized by council for them to spend for that particular function. So the MFMA requires us to put it on our financial statements and say we spent this 20 that was not authorized by council. Then irregular expenditure is, in simple terms, where we've spent money, but the process that we used to spend the money to get the goods or the services did not follow the rules that are in place for us to spend that money. Did we get a service? So maybe we were buying a bottle of water. Did we get the bottle of water? Yes, we got the bottle of water. But the process that we followed to get the bottle of water was not in terms of the rules that are in place for how we engage with the public or service providers to receive those services. So maybe we didn't advertise it for the period of time we should have. Maybe we didn't get 3 quotations. Whatever it is, we didn't follow the rules in the tendering process, as it were. And then fruitless and wasteful expenditure is where you incur an expenditure that then didn't yield the value, or you spend money that doesn't give back a return to the city. So if you pay penalties because you paid your taxes late, that was an unnecessary expense we've incurred that we could have avoided if we had paid in terms of the times allocated to us by SARS, for example.
So it's all in terms of finances. Because I'm asking this, if you then build a stadium right in the middle of a rural area and there is no sports academy or anything like that, and this stadium is lying idle except for somebody wants to use it if there are events, would you call that fruitless expenditure?
I'm not sure, because if it doesn't, then was it in the IDP?
Of course it was in the IDP. Everything must be in the IDP, right?
Was it in the budget?
Of course it was in the budget.
But it's an asset.
But it's an asset that is not used. I'm trying to understand. So this fruitless expenditure only talks to the accounting side.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, that was just an example I gave. I think if you've spent money that then yields no benefit, then that is fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We could have sent someone for training. And maybe they didn't then attend. We paid for it. Didn't attend.
All right.
And most probably your question, Nosipo, actually talks about what we call outcome and impact based. Especially in the way in which services are delivered. And that's one thing that we really haven't seen come out quite clearly in the reporting regime of municipalities. In fact, it's one of the reasons why we even started to talk about social audits, to say Auditor General, we can see the financial audits, but we want to see the impact in society. How about we start looking at a regime where social audits are conducted, where physically council would be able to go and physically view and assess and see if whether that infrastructure is actually providing a value to society, and if whether the infrastructure is actually completed.
And that's what the AG is doing now. There are projects that they pick from our IDP and they physically go on the ground and verify those, and they include them in their audit report.
You were still telling us about the trends, the audit trends when Joburg, and I disturbed you by asking about unauthorized, irregular and wasteful expenditure.
So the trend was that we were seeing an increase year on year, and part of why we were seeing an increase year on year is that we were not getting to the point of clearing the history, as it were. So in terms of the MFMA, when you've incurred these expenses, there's a process that you must follow. We must investigate to say what happened, why did this get classified as irregular or unauthorized, and our internal audit team would then go and investigate, come up with a report. The report must go to one of our oversight committees called MPAC. They then see, is there someone that we must hold accountable for this? Must we go and take it from their salary because they incurred or they were responsible for incurring this expenditure?
And by the way, MPAC is Municipal Public Account Committee.
Okay. All right.
Because sometimes we use this jargon because we're already used to it.
I'm hoping in the next episodes we'll unpack that.
Oh, absolutely. We are getting there. We're getting there.
So once the investigations have been done and the report presented to MPAC, a decision is then made whether they will recommend to council to write off the amount or to hold a specific person accountable, and we put them as a debtor so that we can collect the money from them. Now that process was sort of very protracted, and we had amounts dating back almost 10 years. It hadn't then gone through the investigation and, being presented to council. So the balance kept growing year on year, but we've had quite a massive amount of backlog dealt with in the last 2 years. And I think going forward, it'll increase because our impact will meet more regularly. Our boards at entity level are also able to look at the reports and, decide on whether to write off or whatever within their particular entity. But the challenge is that every year we're still incurring new unauthorized, new irregular,
adding to the pile
of the history. So the key is to work on dealing with the history and clear the backlog, but to also put controls in place so that we don't incur new irregular expenditure, whether it means we must send our staff for training so that they understand the supply chain regulations and how they procure, so that when we get the bottle of water, we followed all the processes, controls in place in terms of ensuring that if we've said you have 100 Rand, that the system stops you when you get to 100 Rand and you're not able to spend the additional 20. So it's important to have proper financial reporting and sort of day-to-day transacting systems, but also proper oversight, so that as we are reporting during the year, any of these things that are apparent as we go through the year, we're able to redirect or change course when we see these matters coming through.
You were saying that the process allows for people to be held accountable for some of these things. Has it ever happened? How much of that money, let's say we say Tina, due to it was her process, she's costed now the municipality 12 million Rand. Do we have instances where that money is collected by the municipality now that it's head as an employee of the municipality?
Yeah, even though it might not come out as material irregularities.
Yeah, I think there are, but I think they're few and far between. The reports I've seen, the vast majority of them actually recommend for council to write off.
I've seen
the amount or to condone.
I've seen that from a city of Ekurhuleni. Quite a lot of recommendations for writing off in the reports of unpack. And some of them would even be referred to the internal audit as well for investigation.
Yes.
And that would be the next question in terms of how does the internal audit relate to the Municipal Public Accounts Committee. But do you continue to continue?
So I think there can be a lot more done to kind of hold individuals accountable. Because I think when you look at how much the amounts grow year by year, and I think even comments the Auditor General raises, our advisory committees like the Group Audit Committee, they're often raising issues of consequence management. Because I think when the investigation concludes with a recommendation that says council can condone, sometimes that accountability doesn't fall at the level of an individual in the in order to instill that there are consequences to not following the processes. And I think that is a shortcoming perhaps in terms of us not always seeing the thread going through to say it was investigated and we're holding Tina accountable and this is what we're going to do.
I suppose that's why I shared with you that I worked in a municipality at some point, and I would have people that said if there was a job vacancy available and in the team, and you'd encourage people to apply, and the first thing that they'd ask you was that, will I have to deal with supply chain issues? When you say yes, they're like, no thank you, I don't want to. And it has created this sense that if your job is going to require you to procure anything, you are almost ending your career, because there are so many landmines in the supply chain space. It's a space that's feared. It's a space that everyone thinks, I'll never crack it. And I think something needs to turn. Something needs to make everyone feel comfortable that the supply chain rules One, they are not that complicated. Number two, they are for the protection of the public finance as well as the institution itself.
The individual.
And the individual, if you follow the rules.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I used to say to some officials that I would interact with. I think maybe the best way in which a city official could protect themselves, particularly from political interference, is to actually hold up the MFMA and say, this is my Bible. I am not going to implement anything outside of this Bible. So help me God.
I think those rules set out in the MFMA, I think the people who wrote the MFMA were very wise and had a lot of foresight, because when you follow it, it works. I think there's a lot of potential situations that they foresaw and built into the legislation. It protects the individual, it protects the organization, and if we follow the rules, it should all work.
It should absolutely go well. Well, I think we have exhausted our time. I mean, we can talk about municipal finances the whole day. I always say to people, local government is a very vast, huge field of knowledge, and you can just only bite it a day at a time, a step at a time. But thank you so much for joining us. I'm really, I speak from a perspective of great knowledge. I can see that you are one of those financial gurus who've been in an institution. But to our audience, thank you very much for joining the Municipal Bill today. And please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And we'd like to thank our sponsors, EPF, Empire Partner Foundation, who has made it very possible for us to host our guests. So we will see you next time. Thank you.
Just you.